This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Ali Michael. Ali works with schools and organizations across the country to help make research on race, whiteness, and education more accessible and relevant to educators. She's the author of Raising Race Questions, Whiteness, Inquiry, and Education, which won the 2017 Society of Professors of Education Outstanding Book Award. She joins me today to talk about her latest book, Our Problem, Our Path, Collective Antiracism for White People, which she co-authored with Elenora Bartoli. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Dr. Ali Michael.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, and I'm going to ask you the question I ask everybody as we begin, which is, Ali, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, this is such a funny question because just the other day I was thinking, I think I'd like to be an author. It's like, I have multiple books that I've released. They're all nonfiction books about race and education. But there's like part of me that still doesn't feel like an author, that doesn't feel like a writer. Honestly, like the very first thing that I wrote that I really loved, that I feel very passionate about, is a biography of a friend of mine in South Africa. So I was a junior in college studying abroad at the University of Cape Town, and I met this woman who was a Black feminist activist in South Africa, and we clicked right away. And she was like 15 years older than me, and she and her husband kind of adopted me into their family. Like literally within hours of meeting her, I was like, had plans to sleep over and play with her kids. And then she asked me, she said, I have a story to tell the world and I don't know how to write it. And I feel like I'm going to be haunted by these ghosts of apartheid my whole life if I can't record these stories. And yet, like, I don't want to let go of them until they're down on paper. And so I was like, well, I don't have a story to tell the world. I don't have anything to say, but I can write, So we sat and talked. I recorded over 100 hours of her story. It became my senior thesis in college. I wrote her story twice. So once entirely in her words, and then once in my words, where it was like I was trying to contextualize her story within the history of South Africa. And it's still not a story. It's still not like I can't publish it. I'm still trying to find the way to tell that story in a way that people will hear it. And so there's like so many stories I still want to tell. That was the first time I wrote something. And I really love the books that I've been producing up until now, but there's some part of me that still doesn't feel like an author, or that still wants to be an author in some way that I haven't, that's like hard for me to define.
Right. I mean, even though your name is on the front of books, you still feel like you're not an author.
Yeah. Or like, I know that I am an author, I can write nonfiction, but can I tell a good story?
Yeah.
Can I get, can I tell a story that people want to follow, that makes people, I don't know. Sometimes I feel that I can, but I guess it's just the way that identity works, that you think of an author as being this particular thing. And even after I've written stuff, I don't feel like an author. So it's like my own personal project. I got to work on that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some time on the couch needed. Maybe, I don't know. But it's like, I grew up having a very limited belief of what creativity is, and because I can't draw. I mean, literally, if you told me your kids' lives are at stake, I need you to draw a picture of a house, we'd have to buy the coffins, because I can't draw. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. And I always consider myself to be not creative just because of that limited view of creativity. And then I was talking to somebody, and somebody's like, you're one of the most creative thinkers I've ever met in my life. Not to toot my own horn, but somebody said that to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? It was that limited perception of what it meant to be creative. So interesting.
It's so interesting. Yeah. And so I do identify as an author, but I identify more as a teacher, as a facilitator, as somebody who is working hard to understand how to be a white person who contributes to racial equity. And the writing is just kind of a vehicle for all of my teaching and thinking. It feels different than like being a writer for the sake of writing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, tell me just sort of a little bit more about that in terms of kind of how you came to do what you do right now for a living.
Well, I think it started because I went to college and I was asked to take a class on basically a diversity credit. And I show up at this African American literature class, and suddenly people are talking about Black this, white that, white savior complex, in Black pain. And I'm sitting there watching all of this and thinking, like, first of all, how do I participate in this conversation? And every time I start to talk, I stop like halfway through the sentence because I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't know the words to use, and I'm suddenly like coming up against this training that I had that I was not aware of. That I was really taught to be colorblind, not to talk about race. In my community, which was almost 100% white, it was like, it's racist people who talk about race. As if you don't have a problem, you don't need to talk about it. We're colorblind, don't notice racial difference. So then I go to college and suddenly like people are saying, no, it's okay. Like we can talk about this. And I'm like, but I can't. My physiology stops me from actually saying anything. And then I'm sitting there listening to the stories of my classmates, people of color who grew up in a really different, same country, same time, but like vastly different contexts, and who really had been deeply impacted by racism. And I thought, I cannot actually be in this conversation unless I build my skills, unless I do better. And so that was the beginning of my own desire to build some racial competency and be able to have this conversation, be able to listen without freezing or panicking. And then over time, as I was studying education and just seeing how much this was happening to teachers all over the country, white teachers especially, who would just freeze and not be able to answer certain questions with students, not be able to address certain problems that families were having because they were racialized problems, and that aspect of it terrified them. So whereas if a child in my classroom is white and has some issue with her pigtails, I might be able to like help her deal with the pigtails. But if she's Black and there's an issue with her hair, suddenly there's like, all my skill goes out the window. Never mind that I would be able to handle this issue if the child was white. And so that's just one of like thousands of examples of where teachers freeze because actually they, for the most part, many of our white teachers grew up like I did in pretty racially homogenous places, and so often panic or don't know what they don't know when it comes to people who are racially different from them. And so in working with teachers, people just would ask these questions. And all my research, all my writing comes from working closely with white teachers and listening to the questions that they're asking, the places that they get stuck, what are the things they want to know, and what helps them move forward, what helps them access their own personal gifts and talents without being frozen by the fact that they haven't learned how to navigate racial stress.
Yeah. So I'm curious, where did you grow up, and then where did you wind up going to college?
All right. So I grew up in Mount Lebanon, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. And I went to college at Williams College, which is in Massachusetts. It's in the northwest corner of Massachusetts. It's very isolated, very rural. The Black students who I went to college with had to go to Albany, which was about an hour away, in order to get their hair done, because it was just such a little white New England town. There was no Black hair salon.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm curious because I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, which is it's a very diverse town, although I went to Catholic school my whole life. So in that regard, all my classmates were, it was a pretty homogenous population. And then I went to school at the University of Connecticut, which is this big, state university. And it was, it was a bit of a culture shock, to be honest. And it was a great experience. I mean, because I purposely wanted to go to a big school to get out of this, very I don't know, kind of very closed in, very safe environment. But it was yeah, I mean, it was definitely a culture shock, meeting people from, when I was a kid, like I didn't go to bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, like, I went to I went to a lot of confirmation parties. But
Yes.
it is, and so it was, almost a little bit of a fish out of water kind of thing. But um
Yeah.
yeah, just interesting how that works out. But
Well, and it's interesting that that might be what our whole lives were like if it weren't for racial segregation, or the
yeah,
history of how race has been used in our country to divide us and keep us in separate communities, separate schools. I mean, we live in a multiracial society, and it's not natural that so many of us grew up in these segregated spaces. We grow up in them, so they feel natural to us, but those spaces are actually they were very carefully constructed through social and public policy, which I didn't see growing up. Like, oh, it's just white people want to live with other white people,
yeah,
and in fact, my community was all white, not by accident. But like there was some real intention in creating that. And I think it makes sense that young people like you and me are kind of like, what else is going on out there? Like,
yeah,
there's a lot I don't know here in this little community. And we get to a place like the University of Connecticut, and we start to experience a society that is what our society would be like if we didn't have so much of this history of segregation.
yeah. No, and it's actually really interesting because I have a twin brother. So a lot of multiples in my family.
Yeah.
I have a twin brother who went to Fairfield University, which you think of the complete antithesis of a big state university. It's a small Jesuit college in Connecticut, 20 minutes away from where we grew up. And it was just interesting, like me going to his college to visit him and his friends and do social things, completely different than, what the culture was like, where I went.
Yeah.
But and I remember my parents, begging me to like reconsider, don't go to that big school. Go to this, because they were big believers in Catholic education. I'm like, I want something different. And but it is, very, I guess I was tired of the homogenization of things. I knew the world was bigger than the community that in which we lived. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's crazy stuff. Crazy to think about it though, too. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it wasn't.
I tell you, I mean, when you read Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, and she writes about the ways that we have not been, we really don't have multiracial families. I mean, we do. In fact, multiracial children are like the fastest growing demographic in the country. But like by and large, people tend to marry people who are racially similar to them. And she talks about how for so long, like I think it was 1964 when it no longer was illegal, although for people of different racial backgrounds to marry and have children together. Now today we still have people in Congress who are proposing that we should make it illegal to marry people from other races. And she says, the thing that has done for so much of our history in the US is made it so that um we don't have intimate knowledge of people who are racially different from us, since we're not in family together, since by and large our families are racially homogenous. We don't have those experiences. Like men and women tend to understand a little bit of like a different gender group if you're in a heterosexual relationship, or if you have a brother or a sister. But for people who are not living with people who are racially different from themselves, we don't even realize how much of like the reality of other folks we're missing. And I thought it was really stark to see that we actually as a country made it illegal to have those kinds of intimate family relationships.
Yeah, that's wild. And then I remember, what was it, in 1968, first interracial kiss on TV was Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek.
I didn't know that.
Yes, that's a fun fact. That is a fun fact.
That is a very fun fact.
Yeah. And by the way, my head is full of useless knowledge just like that.
Oh, excellent.
I'm very
I'm
good
looking
at
forward
trivia
to hearing
pursuit.
more.
Yes. Well, tell me, the book. Tell me about I have to open up my right page here. Our Problem, Our Path. Tell me how this book came to be, and and why now is the right time for this book to be out.
It's funny because it's hard to say this simply, but basically we're trying to change the way white people talk about race and racism. Because in 2020, after George Floyd was killed, there was I feel like there was this big resurgence of white people wanting to engage in anti-racism, but like we call it work. We feel stressed by it. We want to do it, but we don't know how to do it. And there are a lot of great books out there for white people and developing an anti-racist practice. But what we were seeing over and over again was this, like, first of all, deep fear, deep anxiety that was stopping people from taking action, from doing something. And then there was like a competition almost, like, in order for me to prove that I'm anti-racist, I got to call out every racist thing that happens around me. And so this was, and we could see this happening because we'd both been through it. My co-author and I, Elenora, and I had both been through it. So in my 20s, like if my dad said something racist, I would just be like, that's racist. And I would call him names and that would be it. And it was kind of like, he was saying something racist and I'm the anti-racist. So my job is to take him out because I'm anti him. And what I've realized over time is that that's totally ineffective, because what it did for my dad was just make him not want to talk to me about race and racism ever. And at some point I said to him, like after 3 years, I'm really close to my family. There's 4 kids. We all love spending time together. I love both my parents. And I wanted to keep talking with my dad about what I was learning about race. And he did not want to go there with me because I had called him a racist. And it was kind of like, you're not acting in good faith. I don't want to talk about this with you. And so finally, one day we were driving somewhere and I said to him, I really enjoy talking about the things I'm learning with you. And I know I was disrespectful. I called you racist. And I don't think that helps anybody. But I'd love to talk with you. So if you ever have questions about race or racism, I'd love to talk with you about it. And, I'd love to run some of my ideas by you. And he was like, all right, well, okay, well, let me try this one on. So if race is a social construction, why are there more Black people in the NBA? If Black people aren't better biologically at sports, why are there more of them in the NBA than white people? And I was like, I have no idea, but that's a great question. Let's think about it. Let's think about the sociological reasons for that. And we started talking about race again. And part of what I realized is that if I just knock my dad out because I want to be anti-racist, he's just a foil in my own attempt to prove my self-image. But if what I'm trying to do is actually engage white people to develop an anti-racist practice over the course of their lives, I'm going to be much more effective. Like we're actually going to create change. So what I have to do is look at that, my dad or whoever, and say, not that I'm going to ignore that thing that you said, but I want to intervene with you in a way that's going to support you and challenge you to keep learning and keep growing. And in fact, like the way my dad has been growing these days, I mean, he said to me the other day, I look back on 20 years ago, it's all the misconceptions I had about Black people. And I've started to keep a list of them because I can't believe how profoundly my thinking has changed. So he's been uncovering stereotypes, he's been learning, but he couldn't do that when he felt like he constantly had to prove himself to somebody who was just like standing ready to shame him and call him names. And that's what we felt like we were seeing in 2020. It was like a lot of white people competing with other white people, because if I can use you as a foil to show how anti-racist I am, then I win. I can be the best anti-racist white person. And, it's like this ridiculous competition that's happening kind of unconsciously for all these different people. And we're saying it doesn't actually matter. At the end of the day, you and all those other white people, all of us, we still exist in a racial hierarchy that favors white people. We still haven't changed racism. We haven't changed the system. But if we can lean into one another as like support, so that to help people take the next step on their own anti-racist journey, then we're going to get somewhere. And so we're trying to like build off of all the books that have come before us that I think really inform white people about the problem and get people motivated to take action, and then leave us kind of competing with each other or trying to prove that there's, I'm not too fragile, or I'm not a bad person or whatever. And we're trying to say it's not about you, it's not about any of us, it's about the system. And in fact, we can support each other in this. And so we're working to promote a collective anti-racism, which is an anti-racism where white people actually have each other's back and walk with one another on an anti-racist path, rather than just like competing against one another.
Yeah. Because if we're always trying to take out, somebody, we're always going to find fault with other people, if that's our mindset, right? I always think that if we're looking for problems, we will find them, because we'll just be so heightened, we'll just be so primed. But if we're always trying to take other people out versus having a dialogue, then we're always, we're almost going to be only talking to ourselves at some point. You're preaching to the choir, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And what that yields is like in every neighborhood or in every university, there's like a couple super aware anti-racist white people, and that's not enough. We need millions. We need millions of white people to be thinking about, how can I shift things? How can I shift things in my life, in my sphere of influence, so that people of color are not being dehumanized or written off, and so that we don't like have these unconscious assumptions that white people are better or safer. And all of us have power. All of us are needed. Elenora says white people are everybody's an essential worker for anti-racism. And too often we think it's okay just to have like one person who's really good at it. But what it means is that we have to also get over ourselves. We have to be willing to show up imperfectly and take feedback and learn.
Yeah. What's your take on comedy? And is there room for humor in this discussion?
So I grew up in a household where there were a lot of pretty subtle racist jokes and sexist jokes too. And my mom was the kind of feminist who believes that all girls should be able to change a tire and tell a good joke. And so that was like her brand of feminism. And so she would tell jokes. We like, it was important to be good joke tellers, but there wasn't like a lot of clarity around what's a racist joke, what's a sexist joke, what's an appropriate joke, and so I feel like I really value humor. But there was a long time where I tried never, ever to make any joke, because I didn't trust myself to make jokes that were not going to be hurtful. And now I make a lot of jokes at my own expense. So I make fun of my process, or something I said that was funny, or some naive thought that I had, or, I think there's a lot of, it's great. Like, I think storytellers and teachers are often much more compelling when they are able to make fun of themselves. And so I find that really valuable. And I find like some like racial humor in some ways just isn't successful in general, because people are so tense and scared about like what is appropriate. I mean, once you start even just talking about race, people start to tense up and get nervous. And so then when you add racial humor, unless you're really good at it, like there's some professional comedians who are hilarious, but they're incredibly racially competent. So like Trevor Noah knows all of the different lines that he can and can't cross, probably because he's crossed them, and then he's right. Able to see. So I tend to, like, the other day, my mom told a joke, it was actually like 2 years ago, to my kids, that kind of played on a Jamaican accent as like part of the butt of the joke. And I was like, I really don't like that joke, Mom. And my parents live with us, so it's important for me. I mean, it would be important anyway, but like they're around my kids a lot. I said, I don't feel good about that joke. And she was like, oh my God, come on. Like, can't I tell a joke in my own house anymore without someone saying that's racist, And I was like, I don't know. I guess not. Like, if you're going to tell jokes like that, she's like, but it's not a racist joke. And I was like, you're right. Like, and I know that's not your intention, but let me think about it for a minute. Let me think about it for a little bit. And maybe I'm overreacting. So I came back to her later that night, and first thing she said was, listen, I'm sorry. Like, I love you. I love your kids. I don't want to tell racist jokes. I don't understand why that's racist, but if you think it's problematic, I won't tell it. And I said, well, I was thinking about it, and I don't really know 100% that this is wrong, but I know I would not want you to tell it in the presence of my Jamaican colleague. And I know that it uses Black language, in this case, Jamaican accent, as like the reason why it's funny. Like, anything that uses Black culture or any Black language, African, Caribbean, American, it's not going to be funny. It's like, not maybe my Caribbean friend could say, I don't think she would say I don't think she would tell this joke, but like, for us as white people to make a joke that has Black people in the butt of it, it's never going to be funny to me.
Yeah.
Because what that does is it reinforces this racial hierarchy that says white people are better, Black people are laughable, they're silly, they're goofy, they're jokeable, and I don't want to do that. And so for me, that's where I just like draw the line.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, and I wasn't even thinking about like racist jokes per se, but just talking about race in a forum. I spent a lot of time in comedy clubs with comics, from national headliners to up and comers at like open mic nights. And, you do see some people try to push the envelope a little bit with race. And this is coming from, Black comics, white comics, men, women. And some of them, push the envelope with it and they crash and burn, because they can't, because it is objectively offensive. And then other people I've seen use it as a way of almost educating. Now they're still using humor, but there's a message that comes through, a deeper message that comes through. And it's almost like if you could do it with that aha kind of moment, or a way in which like a light bulb goes off in someone's head, even though you're sharing a funny story or making a joke. And I've seen it work in that regard. But I bring up humor because it is a place where people are being canceled. It is a place where and some rightfully so. But I always hear comics talk, hey, we have to be able to walk that line. We have to be able to, speak our truth or whatever it is. So I'm always curious on expert opinion on that.
Well, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think laughing is one of the best vehicles for learning. And I also believe if a group can laugh together, it can cry together. So like, I really don't like to have workshops or talks where I don't make jokes. I think they're really important because it just kind of loosens everything up and makes it possible to take stuff in. I think the people who are not good at it have not yet kind of challenged themselves to see the racial hierarchy that they take for granted. And if you still take for granted a racial hierarchy, so you still kind of have this sense that white people are better or something, in line with the racial hierarchy, you're going to make jokes that are going to be offensive, and it's going to feel to you like, oh, people are so sensitive.
Yeah.
But I think that's the work that people need to do, and then they're going to see where the line is.
Yeah. So I have some fun questions for us, which I always like to do as a way of getting to know my guests a bit more. And the first one up deals with pop culture. So I'd be curious to know, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite TV shows?
Oh man. I like Family Ties, A Different World, The Cosby Show.
I love The Cosby Show.
I
Loved The Cosby Show. I loved Bill Cosby. When I was growing up, I watched his special. It was called Bill Cosby Himself. So often I had most of it memorized.
Mike, I live like a mile from Bill Cosby.
Do you
I
really?
d- I drive by his house regularly, and I think he's there because I think he basically lives under house arrest now.
Yeah.
I think he's there. It's totally bizarre. Yeah, I'm with you. I love that show. Thursday nights, whatever my family,
Yeah.
we gather on Thursday nights and watch television.
So interesting Bill Cosby story. When I graduated UConn in 1996, there were two commencement ceremonies, one for College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, which I was in, one for the business school. Bill Cosby gave the commencement address at the business school. And we had to settle for Quincy Jones at the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, right? So we had to settle for Quincy Jones, who gave an awesome commencement address. But I remember saying to my friends, I'm like, God, I wish we had Cosby, because I was such a huge fan. I just loved his humor. The next time I was on the campus after I graduated, we're fast forwarding, I don't know, 20 plus years. My son was going to a camp where he was dorming at the University of Connecticut. That day there was a whole news crew, and they, the administration were taking away Cosby's honorary doctorate. This is after he was convicted and sent away. It was just a strange full circle experience for me.
Very, very. Yeah,
but,
I still really love Michael Jackson's music, and I really struggle with
I know
who he has, who we now understand who he was.
Yeah, how do we, compartmentalize the artist, their talent, and the person?
Yeah.
It's a hard thing. But if you look back in history, the people we revere were, they didn't have the greatest morals. They didn't do the right things.
Yeah.
And that's true for so many people. And I'm not giving them a pass. It's just,
Yeah. Well, there's this author named Jim Lowen who he wrote a book called Lies My Teachers Told Me, and it's about the lies basically in history textbooks. And he says we need to stop the process of heroification, which is taking, a historical figure and heroifying them. I mean, I don't know if this applies to Michael Jackson and Bill Cosby, but we have all these presidents, for example, who we cannot see as imperfect because we heroify them and we only see them as like all good. And it really makes it hard for anybody to be a leader, because then we think, well, our past leaders were all 100% good.
Right.
So what's wrong with you? And in fact, like, everybody's just a human being. We're profoundly imperfect. We're shaped by our times and by, and so like a lot of people contributed great things to our country who are deeply flawed and have lessons we need to learn from them.
Yeah. But just don't take away Alexander Hamilton from me, because that musical was literally the best thing I've seen. And not that I saw it on Broadway, but oh my gosh, what Lin-Manuel Miranda did that story of Alexander Hamilton. Holy crap.
Amazing.
That's amazing. Well, let's talk about music. What did you grow up listening to?
Oh my God. Whitney Houston, the Beatles. We had like a tape deck, my parents weren't like, we didn't even have a CD player. We had like a couple greatest hits. Tiffany? Wait, is Tiffany, is that?
Tiffany's a thing. Oh yeah. Yeah, I saw her standing there.
Madonna. Did Tiffany have a last name? I don't think she did.
No, she was one of these one name persons.
Yeah, that's what I grew up listening to. Now I'm more of like, I like singer-songwriters, folk music, white feminist rock type stuff.
Little Affair type things.
Ani DeFranco.
You talk about having a tape deck. We had an 8-track player. That was our thing in our station wagon, which is called the Dragon Wagon. And we didn't have many 8-tracks. We had Perry Como Pure Gold, and that was like, my brother and I could still recite the songs from that 8-track.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when you have like one or two albums that you can listen to all the time, they really get into your soul.
Yeah, Paul Simon's Graceland was that for me. My brother and I had a paper route, and on the weekends we had a pretty big route. The weekends, the Sunday paper was enormous, and it was like hard to carry all of those papers. So my father would drive us, and when he would drive, we'd always listen to Paul Simon, Graceland. To this day, one of my favorite albums. If I hear like Boy in the Bubble or anything from that album, it takes me right back to that point in time.
That was lucky. That was lucky that was
Yeah.
your album.
Oh,
It's high
it's such
quality.
a good album. Such a good
Yeah.
album. All right, writing. I know you don't necessarily identify as an author, but you do a lot of writing. Tell me, in what ways, if any, could you or do you view writing as a form of therapy?
Um, th- well, I actually do go to therapy, and which is a different experience,
Yeah.
of writing. But like I said, with my friend Gertrude, she really felt like telling me her stories and having them written down was a way of expelling her ghosts.
Mhm.
And so I definitely believe in the power of storytelling and writing as a way of just processing and sharing the things that we have going on inside. And for me, over the last 2 years, writing during COVID was really valuable. So I would write all day Thursdays and I'd write Sunday mornings when my kids were in Hebrew school. So, and they were on virtual Hebrew school, but it was like I had to kind of clear my time. So I would Wednesday afternoons, it was like I'd start to get into the writing, but part of my process of getting into writing was like answering emails and clearing the next day, making sure I didn't have like a bunch of extra stuff to do. So that Thursdays, I think about writing as like, it's like you go into a mine. You have to take this big long elevator, or even like maybe you're like climbing down a ladder to get to the mine. And when you get there, then you mine the minerals, whatever's there. And like if you go back up that shaft, you're not near you're not near the work anymore. You can't do it, so as soon as I come out of my room or my partner interrupts me or whatever, then I'm like it's over, so I have to like do the work to get down into the mine, and then who knows what will happen, what I'll find when I'm there. But I really like discover what I think when I'm writing. I enjoy my writing time so much. And I guess that's what I mean when I say I want to be an author, is that it's not that I want to publish books. That's something I'm doing. I want to structure my life. So the bulk of what I do is writing, and that I believe enough in my own thought process or in my own humility about my thought process to be able to share it and to like make that my living.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually my living. It's part of what I do right now. But I would love to be Anne Lamott. I would just like love to write all day, all the time, and have that be, because I do think it helps me know what I think. It helps me process the world. And I feel so happy when I'm sitting at the keyboard, when I finally make it down into the mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting into the mind. I love that that visual, because it's so true. Sometimes that elevator ride is long.
Oh my God, it's so hard. And then once you get there and someone just like interrupts you,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's so painful.
I feel bad for that person.
I feel bad for that person. I'm not a kind person when that happens.
I
Yeah.
know, I'm in the zone, but it's true. Like sometimes I'll get lost in the zone, I'll lose hours of time, just because I'm in such a groove, and then all of a sudden I'm being called, it's dinner time. I'm like, oh, really? No, but it's because you lose time. You lose time.
Oh, you
But
do.
what about feeding your inner child? Do you feel like you have an inner child? And if so, how do you feed it?
Interesting. I definitely have an inner child. I think I love having kids so much. My kids are 9 and 12, and they're getting to not be kids anymore.
Yeah.
But I love going to the swimming pool in the summer and just like spending time there, and uh, reading with my 9-year-old, reading out loud, and just, I mean, I love being with kids. It's so fun. It's just like, I feel like parenting means you get to do all the fun things you did when you were a kid again.
Yeah.
And you have just like, well, I have to go to the amusement. I have to go to the water park. Sorry.
Right.
And it's just like, it's such a joy. And I can really feel that it's fleeting right now. And I just love to dance when music comes on. I love to boogie or sing. And, I feel like that feeds my inner child. That's mostly it, but I do that a lot. I do those things a lot.
There's there's so much creativity I think we lose at some point in time. Like I remember, just looking at my own kids. I mean, they're 20 now, but when they were young, like grammar school or even in preschool, they would draw all the time. They would draw, they would paint, they would sing songs, they would put on shows. They would have all this like expression of creativity, and then at some point, like it's sad, but it stops. They don't want to put on shows anymore. They don't want to show you what they're drawing anymore. I mean, my daughter Gracie is one of the most talented artists I've ever seen. She gets that from her mother because my wife is amazing, but she doesn't draw anymore. And if she does, she doesn't share it. And I think that it's just so sad. It's just so sad that just kind of stops. I don't know. It's like something that happens in the process of socialization, but it like kills, our sort of inner child. But I mean, I sing. I mean, I'm a terrible singer. I'm a terrible singer.
Doesn't matter, right? You just
No.
sing louder.
But I just, and or I'll play guitar. I like to be outside. But I like you, I loved having little kids because they were just fun. They were just fun to do those things like go to amusement parks, which I didn't do.
Climb trees.
Yeah. Get dirty.
Kids do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But alas, now I have to wait for grandchildren. I'm no rush for them, but that's my next that's our next stage.
Well, that's real. And what I'm learning watching my parents who they don't miss an opportunity to be with their grandkids. And what I'm learning is that also is fleeting. Like, it feels overwhelming as soon as there's like a new grandbaby in the family, but you got 10 years of snuggles and play. And then it's like, they're big, they're teenagers.
Yeah.
so suddenly. So yeah, I hope you and other folks who are you got a while, but I hope people don't
theoretically
lose the opportunity.
Theoretically, I have a while. Although I had 3 kids at 27, so but it's still 7 years away for them.
Yeah, you got to enjoy your 20 somethings first.
Exactly. And then if you could go back in time and give your younger self some words of advice, what would you tell a younger Allie Michael?
I read this quote the other day that said something about somebody, I don't know, some famous writer and it said that their most prolific time of their life was between the ages of 85 and 92 or something. And I can't remember now who the person was, but I remember thinking, wow, we're always looking at these famous people who we see the sum total of them when they're finished. But like, you don't see what they were like when their kids were really little, or, when they were still getting their degree or whatever. And I feel like that's the thing I wish I could remind myself of, just in an ongoing way, that like, just trust the process, do what you can in the moment, learn what you can, build strong relationships, and do what you can. And like, I think I always felt like I had to somehow be accountable for like the sum total of my whole life when I was 20. And it's like, no, like you're gonna live a long time. You're gonna have a chance to do a lot of different things, and just do what you can in the given moment. Don't worry about like, I don't know, the collective, the legacy.
Yeah.
The long term.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself at a young age.
It's a lot of pressure. I remember people saying like, well, what are you gonna major in? And my friend was like, I don't know, I'm a freshman. How should I know? And I remember being so shocked because I felt like I have to be accountable to that question. I have to answer. I have to have a good answer. I have to know what I'm going to major in. And she was like, that's a stupid question. Why would you ask me that? I'm a freshman. I don't know. And those kinds of moments made me realize how much I felt like I needed to have everything figured out. And there were people who felt perfectly confident, not having any clue.
Yeah.
And I'd like to be more like that person.
I asked this question of everybody, advice to your younger self. And I'm just fascinated because very rarely do people say, oh, buy Apple stock, or, or don't do this, or, study something else. Most of the time, the answer I get is worry less. That's what it kind of boils down to, like worry less. And it's like, I there's something beautiful to that in the sense of, I remember spending so much time worrying, as a teenager, and I'm like, the hell did I have to worry about? But I was always nervous about something, or when I put a lot of pressure to excel academically and start my career. And but yeah, worry less. That's what it kind of boils down to.
I really feel that as a parent, and I know grandparents are always saying that to parents, like just study, it's going to be fine. You don't have to worry so much. But I really felt that this year, like my kids are old enough now. I see, like in kindergarten, I wanted to have so much control over the process, and I'd critique everything the teacher did. And are we in the right school? Are we in the right classroom? Are we doing this right? And now that I see like the full picture of elementary school behind us, I'm like, that was great. Like on a day-to-day, sure. Like the teacher was, was really strict, and my child couldn't like go to the bathroom at school. And like, there were hard moments, but like it ultimately, like, it's the big picture. It's not about all the little day-to-day stuff that we worry about.
Yeah. Well, where can people go to buy this book, Our Problem, Our Path? Where do you suggest people go buy it?
People should go to Corwin.com because it seems to be unavailable everywhere else. So Corwin, CORWIN.com, that's the publisher, and go to Our Problem, Our Path. You can get it from Amazon, but it's like a month backed up. Bookshop.org doesn't have stock. It's amazing to me. So go there. And if you want to find me, I'm at alliemichael.org. There's a supermodel named Allie Michael. That's not me. So if you Google Allie Michael and you get her, just put in Allie Michael White or something, or Allie Michael Race, and then you can find almost all my writing and links to my writing and my website.
But I just going back to what you said about Amazon and Bookshop. I mean, the fact that they're out of stock, that's a good problem to have, right? It means that a lot of people are buying what you're selling.
I hope that's what it means. And because it could also mean that there's just like a big confusion around supply.
No. Well, there's, there's always the old COVID supply chain issue.
That's been really serious. I've actually published 2 books this month, and that has been a big issue for both of them.
You've published 2 books this month, right? I don't want to let that go. You published 2 books this month, yet you don't think of yourself as an author.
I guess I have not yet oriented. I don't. Yes, that's right. I need to somehow write more. I need to I guess because right now I'm just sitting around waiting for people to read what I wrote, and I'm not writing anything right now. So I feel very adrift as a writer. Right now I'm just like, what do people think? So people should write to me. Get the book, read the book. The second book I published is it's not my original work, but it's a young adult version of White Fragility that I wrote with I adapted with a colleague of color, Tony Graves Williamson. And people should read either of these books and then email me through my website so that I have someone to talk to about them, because I'm just sitting around waiting to hear the response.
Yeah.
And it's I feel like I don't feel like a writer right now. I just feel like I'm just like in this purgatory, this writer's purgatory, waiting for feedback.
Well, Tom Petty said the waiting is the hardest part.
That's right.
The late great Tom Petty. I don't know if he was great. He was a great musician.
Yeah, the Wildflowers. I mean, there's no better song for me. Yeah.
All right. I think I just got the title of this episode. The waiting is the hardest part. Well, Dr. Allie Michael, thank you so much for letting me uncork your story. I had a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.